Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the newest release of the Nike Kobe 8 Protro. Let's get into it. Now, starting with the uppers, the 8 Protro, honestly, they look like they're going to breathe a lot better than they actually do. The one thing I noticed is whether this is real leather, vegan leather, action leather, whatever, honestly, I think I'm one of the few people that doesn't really care if it's a real versus synthetic leather in the upper, as long as it performs well and is durable. To me, it doesn't really matter because, looking at the breathability test on these, they did only heat up 108.9 degrees, and that is with an exposed React drop-in midsole. And typically, with exposed drop-in midsoles, really any exposed foam in the midsole, it's gonna hold on to some heat. Nike shoes, for some reason, versus others, just do not hold on to heat like some others. Now, if you look at this on the breathability test, you'll see what I'm talking about. Most of the fog that's coming out is coming out on both sides of the tongue, and then actually where the tongue interacts with the rest of the uppers. That is number one because there is a pretty big gap between the tongue and the uppers, but number two is that's where the actual pores are in the shoe. Once you go further into the forefoot of the 8 Protro, there's a layer of pretty tough netting underneath of that upper that's not allowing fog to egress. Now, like I said, in terms of real leather and breathability and playability, yes, it'll mold your foot a little bit better versus some synthetics, although some synthetics are getting pretty darn close, if not even, in terms of some brands. What I've noticed is though, at least in podiatry or amongst foot doctors, sports medicine physicians, honestly, we used to put leather and vinyl top covers on our insoles a lot, and a lot of us have kind of gotten away from that because they hold on to heat and moisture, they slip and slide around, they can stink really bad later. And yeah, leather is obviously a much more premium product than vinyl, but the two of them kind of occupied that same space. And so honestly, to me, if it's a synthetic versus not, as long as it breathes and plays well, I'm pretty happy with it. Now, moving back here in the uppers after that whole soapbox, this does have a really nice external heel counter. There is a pretty thin internal heel counter in there too, but the external counter, I love that it arches up here, then it is 1.5 times thickness on both sides. It does impart a lot of stability to the shoe that it really does need it, even though, we'll talk about the trappings of the midsole and the drop-in too, but in terms of the uppers, that's the only real piece of foxing or reinforcement up there. I mean, there is the lace line that does have a lot of stitching on it, and then what I really do like about this is it's cut in this V here next to the last two lace eyelets before it hits your ankle, and that really does allow those lace eyelets to cover the anterior ankle. And so for a shoe with this low of an ankle collar and heel counter, the slippage in it is pretty much none. I was even doing some testing for a brace video I'm doing coming up with a comparison, and even though the bulkier brace started slipping a little bit because it was just filling the shoe too much, the other brace I had on that was a little more low profile did not slip one bit. So, in terms of a low profile shoe, you can still get a good lockdown. You can still get minimal heel slippage. I see a lot of people say, well, if you're gonna get a low ankle collar shoe, it's gonna slip. It doesn't have to, and this is proof of it. And it's as easy as just putting this little lip here in the lace line. It doesn't have to be big technology. It can be something as simple as this. And if you look at the upper durability test, 10-second tie grit sandpaper, yes, this does have a little piece of paneling here as a drag guard, and you do get some tread that comes up over it, but the burr did pummel right through that, and it actually started getting into the netting underneath that, into the mesh underneath of it. So we'll talk about the outsole on these. That's a little bit of a conundrum in terms of indoor and outdoor. It's kind of weird. But in terms of the uppers dragging and sliding, especially on gritty outdoor courts, yeah, these are gonna start to get beat up pretty quick. Now getting into the midsole, I did do a tear down on these, just not in the way you probably think. I actually took these to the x-ray machine. Obviously, I'm not going to cut open the Kobe 8 Protro Mambacita. That is just not something I'm gonna do. But I was able to get a pretty good visualization on these because it's got the carbon fiber shank on these on the x-ray. As you can see, that shank is bottom loaded. It is pretty thin carbon fiber. It really only does span the midfoot, but it is pretty cradling, which is nice, especially for a drop-in shoe. Now, the Protros have a full bed of React foam on them. I will say for a drop-in with React, I like React foam in terms of when it's attached to the shoe. In terms of drop-in though, It did feel maybe just a little bit flimsy underfoot compared to what you could put in as a drop-in. However, it is nice and light and kind of feathery. If you look at it on the bounce height test, got 32.5 centimeters in the heel. Now that was with it out of the shoe. When it's in the shoe, it was actually 33 centimeters, which this was an interesting time to actually do that comparison. What does the little bit of rubber actually add to it? Well, on average, it adds about half to 0.75 of a centimeter in terms of bounce height. Now that's on these ones. If you've got a bigger rubber component to it, or if you've got more of a posterior shank, that's obviously going to translate a little bit more. However, in the forefoot, this did get 37 centimeters of bounce height to it. So, I mean, kind of middle of the road, but remember, this drop-in is detached. And although there are some rails on this, which we'll talk about in the fit section, what that does to the fit of it, it's not as secure in the shoe as maybe some other drop-ins we've seen more recently with the really high rails, a little bit more containment in there. I did notice that my foot was rolling over this a few times when I was really coming to a stop. If you look at the lateral flange on these, it is basically just a rubber clip on the outside, which is fine. You know, rubber clip lateral flanges, you know, outsole base lateral flanges, I think are great, except on this one, I noticed one time I actually did buckle that over, which was a little bit scary to me. So yeah, there is carbon fiber in there, and that's all well and good. Like I said, though, it is a little bit thin, and I did notice, especially pivoting in the forefoot on this, when it's just the React foam and then the meshing on top, that's when I think you can get into some issues with stability if you're not an elite level player. Now, the outsole tread of the 8 Protros, definitely the most confusing part of this shoe. Now, on the medial side, it is just a pretty aggressive herringbone, pretty, you know, narrow herringbone, I should say. Then on the lateral side, it's almost like this triangular suction cup pattern, but there is a little bit of an indentation to where the rubber casing is on the lateral side of it. So if you look at it, you know, on the viewing box, there is some rubber movement there, but a lot of it is just the tread acting as a whole to create grip. And honestly, it's the tread kind of buckling and then kind of hitting this lateral wall of rubber is what produces a lot of the grip. Now, if you look at it on the grip test ramp, this thing had an initial grip of 41 degrees, which pretty good, right? Got it on court, and it's, you know, the initial grip was pretty good. It does go through this, I guess, graining phase or maybe a little bit of a dusting phase. I didn't notice too much dust on them, but they definitely take some more rubber warming to actually get back up to the level of grip that I was seeing on the grip test ramp. Because if you look at the durometer of these, they come in at 20.25, which is pretty hard rubber. And if you look at the outsole durability test on these, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, both on the narrow tread as well as the, you know, the little bit chunkier tread, I mean, almost a millimeter of damage, but not a millimeter of damage on this. This is harder rubber. And so, you know, this could do pretty well on an outdoor court. I mean, yeah, the herringbone is narrow, right? So once it starts wearing down, it's gonna start melting into each other pretty quickly. But in terms of the Protro model on these, this is definitely a little bit of a more hard and rugged rubber on these, which I thought was pretty interesting. Now, if you look at the speed ratio of these, comes in at a 2.6, shank score 0.1, brings it up to a 2.7. Honestly, I think that's kind of where they deserve to be. Even though they look like they're pretty unencumbering, they're pretty swift up and down the court, pretty streamlined shoes. Number one, like I said, with the drop-in being React and it just not being super contained, it does feel a little bit disconjointed sometimes when you're running in them. Number two, the stopping power of them isn't so much, like I said, if you don't have really elite level footwork or if you're not already a little bit everted or pronated to begin with. And so I felt just sometimes, you know, I was kind of rolling over into them, plus the fit of them. If you're the right foot type, right, you're gonna get a lot more speed out of them because you're gonna fit these one-to-one a lot better. But I think in terms of speed, yeah, they're very quick shoes, right, in a contained area or a short area, right, if you're trying to get quick step backs, things like that, side to side movement, yeah, they're super quick. In terms of north to south speed, coast to coast speed though, yeah, I'd say they're kind of middle of the pack. But in terms of their fit, obviously you gotta look at usable space versus total space in the shoe, and on a drop-in, there's always gonna be less. So if you look at the length, comes in at 28.6, which is a little bit short just because of the usable space in the heel. And in the forefoot, it actually is pretty flat. So unlike some drop-ins where you still get a lot of caging here or a lot of lipping here in the forefoot, this one actually is a little bit more flat. Also leads to a little bit more movement of that drop-in. Whether that's a good or a bad thing for you, you know, that's up to you. They only do come in at 8.4 centimeters in terms of width though for a men's size 11. like I said, usable space versus total space of the shoe. So they're definitely more of a narrow shoe. I did feel with my feet, right and left, I was kind of, you know, riding the uppers of these shoes a little bit versus, you know, being completely one-to-one on the drop-in. Now, if you're somebody with a narrow foot, that's gonna be great, right? You're gonna get these nice and one-to-one. So if you are a narrow, medium foot, I would just get these true to size. If you are a 2E though, you can go up one size in these because the lockdown is pretty decent in these shoes. You can actually lock them over a bigger shoe, maybe get a little bit more one-to-one on there. And because these are a little bit short in the shoe, right? These aren't gonna feel like clown shoes if you go up sizes. If you're a 4E, I do think this is a mismatch of a shoe, unless you really want this and are willing to break them in a lot at a size up. Like I said, maybe a little bit of a mismatch. In terms of the snake bitten foot or any little lumps, bumps, bruises, and things like that on your feet, you know, React foam, like I said, I do think it's okay when it's part of the shoe. In terms of the React foam drop-in, this was a little bit, to me, unforgiving, right? Especially for things like shin splints or heel pain, Achilles tendonitis, things like that. Even though the heel counter in them was really nice for preventing some micro motion back there, the rest of the shoe is toggling so much that you're still gonna get those same type of torsional issues. Remember, you can't put an orthotic in a drop-in. So I would say if you're not suffering from a lot of issues on these, I think they're just fine. And once you break in the React on this, it's gonna get a little bit better. You're actually gonna sink into the shoe a little bit more. So, you know, maybe, but I would say to me, these are definitely meant for more, like I said, elite level, low to the ground footwork, not necessarily somebody trying to prevent or treat an ailment. And in terms of the all-important playability, I will say, for better or for worse, these shoes allow a lot of contortion. They allow a lot of degrees of freedom and a lot of movement. I noticed when I was trying to do that moving to the left, like Caitlin Clark 3, like off axis, you know, falling left and shooting, you know, trying to contort your body, shooting right. I noticed with these, it was kind of easy to do that, but at the same time, it's pretty easy to do that, like I was saying before, you know, when I'm really putting a lot of force and weight into these shoes, they were buckling. So to me, if you've got light of footedness, right, if you're someone that can, you know, kind of play almost like they're prowling the court or kind of floating around the court, then that's where I think these do their best work. Someone that doesn't have a super heavy foot strike, someone that's not putting, you know, all this body mass down on bad footwork like I am. I think if you're someone that can, I put it this way, if you're someone that can really use the tools of these to really get your feet into weird positions, in and out of weird positions, and if you're someone that doesn't mind the flexibility in the forefoot, especially with that React drop-in, then yeah, I think they're fine. In terms of Kobe models, the 8s are not my favorite, the 8s or the 8 Protros. I definitely like some others in the line better. There are models that I think have the best parts of the 8s, but also have a little bit more of the performance and stability. You actually do want to check that video up. I will leave that linked here up above, and make sure you subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.